Hi there, my name is Cecilia Berlin. I am a human factors and ergonomics researcher at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden. And I'm going to introduce a stakeholder analysis tool called Change Agent Infrastructure, or CHAI for short. So this is a stakeholder analysis tool. And that type of tool is very useful if you're going to change something in a workplace. And I'm a human factors and ergonomics researcher, so usually what I would like to have happen is that some design aspect of the workplace gets influenced in order to optimize human well-being and system performance in parallel, which is the modern definition of ergonomics. Usually if you make a change in a workplace, you have a lot of stakeholders to contend with. And they all have legitimate interests and they have different objectives and agendas to manage in parallel with keeping up good relations with each other. So if you are a change agent in this environment, it could get challenging to quickly grasp what it is they're trying to do and how they react to the proposed change if it affects them. So in order to orient yourself as a change agent in this type of environment and determine whether your change proposal has a chance of succeeding, you can usually benefit from doing a stakeholder analysis. The thing is that if you start reading up in literature, the one you'll find most often is this one, the power interest grid, which is a four-fielder kind of idea which separates your stakeholders into having high or low power and high or low interest. So basically, this is a project management tool so that a manager can determine whether to allocate resources and information and attention to different stakeholders who have more or less power or influence over the change. And this can get you quite a bit on the way, but it's not quite so powerful for someone who is trying to orient themselves and gain consensus around how a change will affect or benefit different stakeholders. So I propose in this method that we look at stakeholders in a different way. And there are two basic ideas at the heart of CHAI. The first one is the idea of roles. Roles are 8 non-exclusive categories of how actors respond to the change. So they have some sort of reaction in relation to what sort of objectives and agendas they have, and then they see this change proposal and they react to it a certain way. And these categories are non-exclusive because one actor can take on several different roles. Now, actors are any defined individual or group whose characteristics lead to them reacting to the change in a particular way. And I should mention that actors can be both human and non-human. So examples of non-human actors can be things like laws or checklists or softwares or standards, that sort of thing. And it might be unintuitive at first to consider also those entities as actors, but it turns out to be very powerful to remember those in a change process. So the 8 categories or roles are present here, and I will explain them all one by one. But the general idea is that there's no sequence or order between any of them, but I do recommend sticking with the same order if you are going to do workshops or follow up the change agent infrastructure later on. So the first role is that of the convincer. These are actors that convince other actors that the underlying problem is legitimate and that there are measurements, statistics, and different kinds of quantification that justify that you do something about it. Initiators are the actors that bring attention to the problem and tell everyone else, hey, this needs addressing, and then they place the change project on the agenda to be dealt with. After that, you have sponsors. These are actors who might not necessarily be affected by or active in the change project, but they do support it morally or with resources or attention, and they help to keep the issue on the agenda, and they'll be following up whether it gets solved. The subjects of a change proposal are the actors whose operations are directly affected by this change or by the underlying problem. So perhaps this could be the workers who are under a lot of strain, or the workers who are in danger because of a hazardous machine or something. And they will, of course, then also be quite affected by the change project's outcomes. Change owners are the actors that gain the legitimate ownership of the change. They're given it, and they also are given the mission to solve the problem and the mandate to determine when the problem has been sufficiently addressed. So basically, they put the stamp of approval on when the change is complete. Then there's a category called solution builders, and these are the actors that partially or completely contribute to the proposal of the solution, or the solution that is implemented. So solution builders can be anyone from an expert to an engineer to a problem solver in general. So there could be just one solution builder, which would mean I would call them a problem solver, or it could be several actors that work together. And the solution builders collective effort is what gets evaluated by the change owner in order to determine whether they have done enough and the change is complete. Documenters document the problem, the requirements on the proposed solution, the quality demands and criteria that it must live up to, the decisions that are made, and the solution's design and implementation. So complete documentation has a tendency to become the law of how to do things at a company. So I would say documenters might not appear terribly active in a project like this, but they can end up having a very significant long-term impact, because the lessons learned aspect usually gets caught on paper that way and then gets transferred as the knowledge base of the organization. Blockers are actors who have a reason to stop, shift focus or resources from, or hinder the progression of the change project. This might not necessarily be purely hostile. Some blockers are obviously opposed completely to changing for the sake of not changing. But there might also be blockers that don't have enough time to give to the change project, or they might have different priorities, or they might see the change as a threat to something else that they would like to see happen. So blockers can come in all degrees of aggressiveness, we can put it that way. So originally with CHAI, the general idea was to organize which actors were within the organizational boundary or outside of it. And that's one way you can do a CHAI analysis, but it turns out to become very visually disorganized. So my suggestion at this stage is to form it as a matrix when you do the CHAI analysis. So I would propose to have a sticky notes workshop together with a team who help each other think about who the stakeholders are. So what you do for starters is that you list all the 8 roles and place them on top. And then in your team, you can either brainstorm freely about who are the stakeholders that are in the picture when it comes to this change, or you could actually use the 8 different roles and brainstorm one by one which actors take on each of these roles. And the most important and powerful thing of a CHAI workshop is this part, answering why are the different actors taking on these roles? What reasons do they have to be blockers or convincers or change owners and so on? And the nice thing about asking the question why here is that if you're a team, you can build a lot of mutual understanding in the team about how the different stakeholders are reasoning and what their justification is for either hindering or facilitating this change. What's interesting to note here is when certain actors have several different roles, or when certain roles don't actually have any actors. So in this fictive case that we have here, nobody is the problem subject. So perhaps that might lead to nobody thinking that this change is really worthwhile because it doesn't affect anybody. Or another conclusion could be that, for example, the financial officer is both a blocker and a convincer, which could be very interesting from the point of view that they know that a change is necessary based on the evidence, but perhaps they have other reasons to not want to see it through. So the general idea of carrying out the CHAI workshop is that after a while you can start counting. And counting helps you figure out which are the critical actors. Those would be the actors that have a large number of roles. So if you have a lot of different roles, then it means you might have a conflict of interest in relation to the change being carried out. And if you have a conflict of interest, it might be a case of inappropriate staffing, or that you might need a lot more decision support in order to make a good decision. And the other type of critical actor is if you are the only one in a particular role, because it means you become dominant in that particular reaction to the problem. The other side of it is to look at critical roles. So that would be roles that have a large number of actors. If a lot of people are reacting the same way to the change, it might mean that they have to do a lot of talking together to gain consensus about how to proceed. And that might also be a case of inappropriate staffing or allocation. Another interesting thing is if you have roles with no actors at all. So a particularly bad one is if you have no change owner, because with nobody given the mission or the mandate, it's not very likely that the change will happen. So overall, Chai is meant to give a change agent more of an understanding of all the different relationships that there are to navigate. And the theoretical underpinnings of this method are available in an article that I wrote together with two colleagues, Jonathan Berglund and Erik Lindskog. And all of the information you need to carry out a Chai analysis will be in a folder that I provided a link to in the description below. And finally, if you're oriented towards the digital side, there is a Excel template for Chai if you want to make this kind of analysis and keep it in your computer. So I would recommend browsing around so the different cells have instructions and the different roles have explanations. And then in these cells, you change the name of the actors and you write the explanation why in these cells, and that will help you document. So I hope this helped, and I hope that you might find Chai useful in your future change projects. So thank you very much for listening.